The U.S. Justice Department is suing Georgia over its new voting legislation critics say restrict voting rights.
Our complaint alleges that recent changes to Georgia's election laws were enacted with the purpose of denying or abridging the right of black Georgians to vote on account of their race or color in violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
The Georgia law was enacted after the 2020 election. It's in step with Republican-led legislatures nationwide trying to narrow voting access in the wake of President Donald Trump's election defeat. The Justice Department also said it is putting together a task force to look into the rise of threats against election officials. Joining us live is Representative Nikema Williams. She's a Democrat from Georgia, a former state representative who now holds the seat held by John Lewis before his passing. And also, Congressman Mark Vesey is a Democrat from Texas and the House Assistant Whip. They are both co-chairs of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus. Good to see both of you. And in the meantime, we are watching the scene from Surfside, Florida, and I do want to ask you about that in a moment. But first, let's talk about voting rights efforts here and this lawsuit by the DOJ. Congresswoman Williams, your hopes for this lawsuit?
So I was pleased to hear that the DOJ was intervening in this law in Georgia because that is their job, to be the people's attorney. They literally represent Americans across this country to protect their civil rights. But I also know that that doesn't abdicate us as members of Congress of our responsibility and our duty to make policies to ensure that everyone in this country, regardless of where they live, have their access to the ballot protected. We should have standardized processes, and right now that's not happening. So we still have work to do as members of Congress, and that's what we are focusing on in the Voting Rights Caucus, is making sure that we get H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed, because we need these protections so that everyone has their access to the ballot.
So, Congressman Vesey, this lawsuit from the DOJ does come after Republicans blocked H.R. 1, the For the People Voting Rights bill. Does this lawsuit, in your view, this effort come from the legislative defeat?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that the DOJ has intervened in Georgia. And Frederica, I would ask you to also watch Texas. You may be aware that the governor has called a special session in Texas for July 8th, and they're going to go in and they're going to try to pass this discriminatory voting law in our state as well. And so if we don't put an end to this now, you're going to see these laws continue to proliferate all over the country, and they're aimed at making it harder for Black and Hispanics to vote. And so I want to echo what my colleague Nikema Williams has said, co-chair of the Voting Rights Caucus. We absolutely have to pass H.R. 1. We have to pass H.R. 4, particularly for those of us in the South. H.R. 4 is going to be huge because it puts pre-clearance back into play, because this is very serious. This is not some sort of a game or just some sort of a partisan exercise. We're talking about trying to purposely and be overly prescriptive so you can disenfranchise Black voters in America. And it's just unjust.
Mm-hmm. And so, Congressman Vesey, while Georgia is first in terms of facing a lawsuit from the DOJ, do you see that Texas is also on the horizon for the DOJ?
I hope that the DOJ is watching Texas closely. Nothing good is going to come out of this special session. Nothing good at all. I was in the state legislature as well. I spent 8 years there. And a lot of the rhetoric that you hear from Republican state legislators about all of the voter fraud that takes place in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, they would say these things very openly and very candidly. Laws saying that you can use your phone to record people while they're voting so you can get voter fraud on camera, and wanting judges that are elected in primaries, which is how you get elected in a lot of these Texas counties these days. They want these Republican judges that are elected in these primaries to decide whether or not close elections should be overturned. It's insane what's happening here. And so, yeah, I would ask Kristen Clark and everyone else over at DOJ to continue to watch what's happening here in the Lone Star State, because they are really trying to push the envelope without us having pre-clearance and the protection of the Voting Rights Act, and also with us not being able to pass H.R. 1 is why we have to keep pushing to make sure that we get both of those passed.
Congresswoman Williams, not long after the Department of Justice announced its lawsuit against Georgia, the Georgia governor, Brian Kemp, had this reaction. Listen.
They are coming for you next. They're coming for your state, your ball game, your election laws, your business, and your way of life.
So, Congresswoman, what do you believe Governor Kemp means when he says threatening your way of life?
Yes.
Frederica, I grew up in Alabama, and this gives me reminiscence of all of the stories that I learned in my Alabama history books of the segregationists of the South who drew their line in the sand because they didn't want people who look like me to have access to the ballot, to have rights in this country. So Brian Kemp, history is not going to be favorable upon him. The people will continue to show up and make sure that their voices are heard, and we'll be right there with them every step of the way to make sure that we're securing their right to vote.
At the same time, while Governor Kemp received a lot of criticism from then President Trump and many of his supporters, do you believe that the way he is digging in his heels in support of this new legislation, in impacting potentially the next election, that he will win support as he is now up for re-election?
He is absolutely trying to gain favor from former President Donald Trump, but Frederica, it's appalling that we have a governor in our state who is supposed to be representing all of the people sitting here trying to restrict the right to the ballot. I know that as a black woman in the South, I wouldn't even have the right to vote in this country if it were not for the federal government. So we're going to continue to move forward, and Brian Kemp's days are numbered as governor, and I'm looking forward to having real leadership in my state.
All right, Congressman Vesey, I wonder if I could switch gears as the search, and rescue efforts continue in South Florida, even though the fire chief said they have yet to find any kind of, sign of life there. What are your thoughts on what's taking place there right now? And what potentially could happen next in terms of building inspections, as the Miami officials are saying, any building, over 40 years will get a new once-over, particularly after what's taken place there.
Yeah, obviously, what happened is horrific. I when I saw the news first on your network, I couldn't believe it. That a building in America would collapse like that. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families. It's absolutely terrible. And not long ago we had a incident in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where a bridge collapsed and people perished over the water. And so what I would say is that we need to take this seriously. Obviously, these buildings need to be inspected. And we need to get this infrastructure bill passed, because there are other structures like this, not just apartment buildings, but bridges and other pieces of very critical infrastructure that moves thousands of people a day. And we need to make sure that this infrastructure is safe for America. It's serious, and we don't ever want anything like that to happen again. It shouldn't happen in our country. We have the best engineers, we have the best inspectors, but we need to give our states and local governments the money that they need in order to make sure that these can last for generations.
Congresswoman Williams, what are your views on what will soon be these citywide inspections of buildings 40 years and older that are 5 levels and up there in South Florida, particularly in the Miami-Dade area?
I've been watching the coverage, and it's horrific, and my prayers go out to the families of people who are still missing, and they don't even know if they're going to be reconnected with their loved ones. We have a responsibility as leaders in this country to make sure that if we have the opportunity to move an infrastructure package, that we're looking at things like this. Congressman Vesey couldn't be more factual when he talks about the crumbling bridges and infrastructure in our country that are leaving so many Americans vulnerable to issues like this. So we have to do our job as members of Congress and move forward bold and visionary policies that are truly going to look out for all people, and that means things like infrastructure.
Members of Congress, Nikema Williams, Mark Vesey, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. Be well.
Thank you.